This story is titled, I kicked out my mother-in-law after she set a fire at my house. Now my wife demand I apologize to her, but I refused, and this happened.
Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video, alright? I need to get this off my chest because I feel like my entire life just flipped upside down, and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing anymore. My mother-in-law, Lisa, 62 female, is like a walking, talking disaster zone. She's one of those people who somehow makes every situation about herself, plays the victim 24/7, and then acts shocked when no one wants to deal with her anymore. For years, I've just gritted my teeth and put up with her nonsense for Sarah's sake. And for what? For her to act blind and treat me like this? Let me back up a bit. Lisa has never liked me. I don't know if it's because I married her perfect daughter or because I don't kiss the ground she walks on, but she's made it clear from day one that she thinks I'm the problem. At our wedding, our freaking wedding, she pulled Sarah aside right before she was supposed to walk down the aisle and told her she should really think about whether I was the right guy for her. Like, who does that? Sarah didn't listen, thankfully, but the fact that Lisa even tried still pisses me off to this day. It was a huge red flag that I should have paid more attention to. Then, when our first kid was born, Lisa managed to one-up herself. Sarah didn't want anyone but me in the delivery room, and she made that clear to everyone, including her mom. Well, Lisa decided that rule didn't apply to her, and tried to barge in anyway. When the nurse told her she couldn't go in, she caused such a scene in the waiting room that security had to get involved. I wasn't even there for half of it, because I was with Sarah. But when I came out to check on things, Lisa was yelling about how I was controlling, and how Sarah was pushing her own mother away. It was embarrassing, to say the least. So yeah, Lisa and I don't exactly have a great history. But Sarah? Sarah loves her mom, flaws and all. She always says, she's my mom, I can't just cut her off, and I get that. I really do. But there's a difference between helping someone and letting them bulldoze your life. Lisa has never figured that out, and apparently neither has Sarah. Anyway, a few weeks ago, Lisa called Sarah crying. I don't mean regular crying. I mean the kind of dramatic, heaving sobs that make it impossible to understand a word she's saying. From what I could piece together, her landlord was kicking her out because she hadn't paid rent in months. Typical Lisa. She doesn't work, doesn't save, and somehow always expects someone else to swoop in and save her when things fall apart. Before I could even process what was happening, Sarah was saying, "Of course you can stay with us." Like it was no big deal. My jaw practically hit the floor. I couldn't believe she'd just invite her mom to move in without even talking to me first. "Wait, we need to talk about this," I said, but Sarah had already hung up. She turned to me with that look, the one that says, "What's there to talk about?" "She's my mom," Sarah snapped. "She's your mom, but she's also a walking tornado of drama," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We have 2 young kids, Sarah. Do you really want to bring her chaos into our house?" "She's not chaos. She's family," Sarah shot back, already getting defensive. "Then why don't you ask your brother or sister to take her in? They don't have kids, and they both have guest rooms. Why can't she stay with one of them?" I countered. I knew for a fact that her siblings could handle Lisa way better than we could. "They don't want to get involved," Sarah muttered, looking away. "Exactly," I said, throwing up my hands. "If her own other kids don't want to deal with her, why should we? It's not our responsibility to fix her mess." Sarah glared at me like I just insulted her entire family. "So you're okay with letting my mom be homeless?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Honestly? Yeah, I kind of was. But I knew better than to say that out loud. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I just said, "I'm trying to protect our family. We've worked hard to build a stable home for our kids. I'm not going to risk that because your mom can't get her life together." That didn't go over well. Sarah called me heartless and stormed off, leaving me to sit there and stew in the awkward silence. I thought maybe she'd cool off and realize I was right. But no, she was already making plans to bring Lisa here, whether I liked it or not. Here's the thing. I know Sarah loves her mom, and I know she feels guilty that Lisa has nowhere else to go. But when does it stop? When do we stop letting toxic people steamroll our lives just because they're family? I tried explaining this to Sarah, but she wasn't having it. She kept saying things like, "She's not perfect, but she needs a little help." I've heard it all before. Lisa always needs a little help, and it always turns into a huge mess. And you know what the worst part is? I could already see how this was going to play out. Lisa would move in, make a huge mess, figuratively and literally, and then leave us to pick up the pieces. It's her pattern. I've seen it too many times to think this time would be any different. The next couple of days were tense. Sarah barely said a word to me unless it was about the kids, and even then she was curt and short. It was like living with a stranger. I knew she was pissed at me for pushing back about Lisa, but what was I supposed to do? Pretend like this was going to work out? I thought maybe she'd take some time, think it over, and realize I had a point. Instead, she doubled down. She has nowhere else to go, Sarah finally said that evening after the kids were in bed. Her tone wasn't angry this time, but desperate. What do you want me to do? Let my mom live on the street? She kept begging, and I realized I wasn't going to win this argument. Sarah wasn't thinking about the bigger picture. She was just focused on saving her mom. And as much as I hated the idea, I knew there was no way I was going to convince her otherwise. Fine, I said, throwing my hands up in defeat. She can stay, but only until she finds another place. This isn't a permanent thing, Sarah. She needs to know that. Sarah's face softened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to thank me. Instead, she said, I'll talk to her. She'll understand. But I knew Lisa wouldn't understand. Lisa never understood boundaries. This wasn't going to be a short stay. This was going to be an invasion. Lisa showed up 2 days later with more stuff than I thought was humanly possible for someone who was supposedly on the verge of homelessness. She didn't even try to pack light. There were suitcases, boxes, random bags of who knows what, and even a stack of plastic bins. By the time she'd hauled everything into the house, the guest room looked like an episode of Hoarders. Thanks so much for letting me stay, Lisa said, flashing me a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. I really appreciate it. I nodded, biting my tongue. Just until you find another place, I reminded her. Of course, she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. I'm already looking. I just need a little time to get back on my feet. Sarah beamed at her mom like she'd just solved world hunger, and I knew there was no way this was going to end well. The first few days weren't too bad, but that didn't last. Lisa had a way of making herself at home that felt less like a guest and more like she was trying to take over. She left her stuff all over the house, her bags spilling into the hallway. She treated the guest room like her personal storage unit, cramming it full of junk and making it impossible to walk through without tripping over something. And then there were the little things. She'd leave dirty dishes in the sink instead of putting them in the dishwasher. She even started rearranging things in the kitchen because she didn't like how we had it set up. I tried to ignore it, but it was like she was deliberately pushing my buttons. Can you talk to her about cleaning up after herself? I asked Sarah one night after the kids were in bed. She's still getting used to things, Sarah said, brushing me off. She'll settle in soon. How much more settled can she get? I muttered. But I didn't press the issue. Yet. It all started the night Lisa burned dinner. Or rather, the night she turned dinner into some unidentifiable horror show and insisted my kids eat it. Lisa had decided to help by cooking dinner. But as always, she didn't bother asking if we needed her help. By the time I got home from work, the kitchen looked like it had been through a war. Pots, pans, and utensils were scattered everywhere. The counters were smeared with something I didn't want to identify. And the smell? Burnt mystery food mixed with regret. What's going on in here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while mentally calculating how many hours it'd take to clean up this mess. Lisa spun around with this overly proud grin, holding a ladle of what I can only describe as chunky sludge. I made dinner, she chirped, clearly waiting for a round of applause. Sarah came in right after me and immediately started doing damage control. Mom, this is so thoughtful of you. Thank you, she gushed, though I caught the slight hesitation in her voice when she glanced at the pot. Lisa waved her off like she was a hero. Oh, I just thought it would be nice to cook for the family. Nice? Sure. Edible? Hell no. But before I could suggest we order pizza, Lisa was already serving the kids. My kids, my poor kids, looked downright panicked when the bowls hit the table. They gave me that wide-eyed, do we really have to eat this? Look, but before I could say anything, Sarah jumped in. Try your grandma's dinner, she said gently. She worked hard on this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The kids hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Sarah nudged them again. It's just a little, guys. It'll make Grandma happy. That's when I lost it. No, I said, sharper than I intended. Do not force them to eat something just because you don't want your mom to feel bad. Sarah turned to me with that, you're making a scene look, but I wasn't backing down. They don't have to eat this, I said, motioning to the sludge in front of them. No one should have to eat this. Lisa gasped like I just kicked her puppy. Do you see how he's treating me, Sarah? She cried, turning on the waterworks. I was just trying to help and he's being so mean. Mean? I shot back. Lisa, the kids don't want to eat this. And honestly, I don't blame them. You're not cooking for them again. The room went silent for a moment before Lisa stormed out dramatically, muttering something about how ungrateful I was. I told the kids to go to their rooms, and then I did what any reasonable parent would do. I ordered them DoorDash, because ain't no way my kids were eating whatever that was. Sarah and I got into it later that night. She said I embarrassed her mom, and I said her mom embarrassed herself. I mean, seriously, how is it my fault that Lisa turned dinner into a biohazard? If anything, I should have gotten a medal for keeping my cool as long as I did. While we were arguing, I caught Lisa standing in the hallway just watching us. She was giving me the dirtiest look, like she'd been plotting my downfall since the second I walked through the door. And honestly, I should have known that look was going to change my life forever. A few nights later, everyone was fast asleep, or so I thought, finally getting some much-needed rest after dealing with Lisa's antics all week. The house was quiet, and everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. I woke up to the fire alarm blaring. At first, in my half-asleep state, I thought maybe it was just a false alarm. But then the smell hit me, thick, suffocating smoke. My heart started racing as panic set in. I shook Sarah awake. "Sarah, get up! The fire alarm!" We both bolted out of bed, the smell of smoke growing stronger with every second. My head was spinning as we rushed down the hallway. When we got to the living room, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Flames were crawling up the side of the couch and spreading to the curtains. The coffee table was already in flames, and thick black smoke filled the room. Sarah gasped, and I shouted, "Get the kids! Get them outside now!" She didn't hesitate, running down the hall to grab them while I sprinted to the kitchen for the fire extinguisher. Lisa, meanwhile, was standing in the corner, coughing and flailing her arms like she didn't have a clue what to do. "It was an accident!" she yelled, but her tone was defensive, not apologetic. I didn't have the luxury of time to deal with her. I grabbed the extinguisher and started spraying, my mind racing to keep the flames from spreading further. The whole thing felt like it lasted forever, but eventually I managed to put out the fire. The living room was a disaster, and that awful, lingering smell of smoke that clung to everything. Sarah was outside with the kids, who were shaken but safe. My hands were still trembling as I turned to Lisa, who stood there looking like the victim in all of this. I didn't say anything, but the words were on the tip of my tongue. This was going to be a breaking point. I could feel it. "What the hell happened?" I demanded, turning to Lisa once the fire was out. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, like she had no idea why I was upset. I was lighting some candles," she stammered. "I guess one of them fell over or something. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Candles!" I shouted. "You started a fire in my house because of candles?" "It was an accident," she insisted, but there was something off about her tone. She didn't sound scared or sorry, just annoyed that I was yelling at her. I glanced around the room, trying to piece together what had happened. That's when I noticed the pile of burnt papers on the coffee table, along with an empty lighter. This wasn't a candle accident. This was something else entirely. "Why are there burned papers here?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Lisa's face turned red. "I was just cleaning up some old documents," she said quickly. "I thought it would be faster to burn them, but I didn't think it would get out of hand." "You thought burning papers in the middle of the living room was a good idea?" I said, my voice rising, because nothing made fucking sense. Before she could answer, Sarah came back inside, having left the kids in the car. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between me and her mom. "Your mom just set our living room on fire," I said, pointing to the mess. "It was an accident," Lisa repeated, this time with fake tears in her eyes. "I didn't mean to." "She was burning papers," I said, turning to Sarah. "In the living room. Who does that?" Sarah looked at her mom, her expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. "Mom, is that true?" Lisa sniffled, wiping her eyes dramatically. "I was just cleaning up. I didn't want to leave a mess, so I thought burning the papers would be easier. I didn't think it would get out of control." "She didn't mean it," Sarah said, conflicted, turning back to me. "You don't have to yell at her." "She almost burned our house down, Sarah," I yelled. "The kids were upstairs. What if we hadn't woken up in time?" "It's not that big of a deal," Lisa muttered under her breath. But I caught it. That was the moment I knew she didn't care. Not about us. Not about the kids. Not about the house. She'd set the fire because she was pissed at me for not treating her like the queen of the castle. I stood there, staring at the charred mess, while Lisa sniffled dramatically in the background. Sarah was still defending her, but my patience had officially run out. I couldn't let this go. Lisa had to leave. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat Sarah down and said, cutting straight to the point, "She's gotta go." Sarah looked up from her coffee, her eyes narrowing. "What? She's not going anywhere." I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Sarah, your mom set our living room on fire last night. She almost burned down the house with the kids in it. Do you understand how serious this is? She didn't mean to, Sarah said, her voice rising defensively. It was an accident, I said sharply, trying to keep my cool. Stop calling it an accident. She was burning papers, Sarah, in the middle of our living room. That's not normal. That's reckless, Sarah said, her voice trembling. You don't know what it's like to feel like you have nowhere to go. I can't just kick her out. You're not kicking her out. I am, I said flatly. Because if you won't, I will. Sarah's face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might finally see where I was coming from. But then she said the thing that shattered me. If you kick her out, I'll leave too. I stared at her, stunned, but she continued. I mean it, she said, her voice shaking. If you make her leave, I'll take the kids and go. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd just been punched in the gut. You'd take the kids and leave me? For what? Just now, you didn't seem to care about the kids much when you were fine leaving them with her, even though she's reckless enough to almost burn us all alive. What changed now, Sarah? Or are you just trying to use our kids again to satisfy your unstable mother? Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. She has no one else. If you do this, I can't stay here. I was speechless. For years, I'd put up with Lisa's drama because I loved Sarah. I'd bent over backward to keep the peace, even when it meant sacrificing my own sanity. And now she was telling me she'd walk away from everything we'd built, our marriage, our family, to protect the woman who'd almost burned our house down? Sarah, think about what you're saying, I said, my voice cracking. She didn't mean to hurt anyone, Sarah said weakly. She's just lost. I stared at her in disbelief. Lost? Sarah, are you seriously waiting for someone to actually get hurt before you believe your mother isn't normal? She almost burned the house down with all of us in it. What will it take for you to see that this isn't okay? My voice was rising, but I couldn't help it. The thought of something worse happening made my stomach turn. What happens if there's another fire, and we don't wake up in time? What happens if one of the kids gets hurt because of her carelessness? My voice cracked, and I had to stop myself from finishing the thought. Sarah didn't respond. She just sat there, staring down at the table with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I thought she might finally understand, but instead, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there with the weight of it all pressing down on my chest. By the time dinner rolled around, I wasn't going to wait for Sarah to do the right thing. I was going to handle this myself. After dinner, I cornered Lisa in the living room. You're leaving, I said, my voice low and steady. She looked up from the TV, her face immediately twisting into a scowl. Excuse me? You heard me, I said. Pack your stuff. You're out. Lisa laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. You can't be serious. Sarah would never let you kick me out. She won't have to, I said, because I'm calling the cops. Before I could dial, Sarah came rushing into the room, her eyes wide with panic. What's going on? I'm calling the cops, I said, not taking my eyes off Lisa. Ignoring Sarah's protests, I dialed 911. Lisa started yelling, calling me every name in the book, but I didn't care. I told the dispatcher about the fire and explained that we had security camera footage of what had happened. When the cops arrived, the officers questioned her for a while, and Lisa tried to spin her usual sob story, but the evidence didn't lie, showing Lisa setting the papers on fire and standing there as the flames spread. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't trying to put it out. She was watching. Eventually, they escorted her out of the house. I didn't stop there. I pressed charges and handed over the security footage as evidence. I told the cops explicitly that she wasn't to come back to the house under any circumstances. They took it seriously, and a few hours later, they called my brother-in-law Tom to come pick her up. Tom showed up looking furious, though not at Lisa, of course. He wasn't thrilled with the situation and made it clear he didn't agree with me calling the cops. But I didn't care. Sarah, however, decided to go with her mom. She left the house without saying much, just a tearful look back at me before walking out the door. The kids stayed with me, of course. She did not think about them again. This was the last thing that happened. Sarah leaving with her mother without looking back at us. I knew this wasn't going to end well, and I made my decision right then and there. If she was picking sides, and the wrong one at that, then so be it. The next morning, Sarah came back and immediately started pleading with me to drop the charges. She was crying, her voice shaky, begging me to drop the charges, adding, I can't just stand by while you destroy her life. I stared at her, my jaw tightening. Destroy her life? Sarah, she's done that to herself. I'm not the one making reckless decisions. You can keep making excuses for her, but I'm done enabling this behavior. She did not argue much. She did look exhausted. The following days were tense. Sarah was cold and distant, her every glance and clipped word dripping with anger. But things got worse when I got home and everything was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, even on her worst days, Sarah would let me know if she was taking the kids out. Whether it was to her sisters, the park, or even just a grocery run, She always said something. But today? Nothing. I stood in the entryway, my keys still in hand, scanning the empty house. My chest tightened. Something wasn't right. I called out, "Sarah? Kids?" My voice echoed back at me. No answer. My mind immediately started racing. Did she take the kids and leave? Did she actually go through with what she'd threatened? My hands started to tremble as I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. The first call went to voicemail. The second call rang through but went unanswered. By the third call, I was pacing the living room, my heart pounding. She finally picked up, but her voice was cold, distant. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of panic and anger. "Where are you? Where are the kids? Why didn't you tell me anything?" There was a pause before she answered, her tone completely indifferent. "We're at my brother's." Relief hit me like a wave, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Your brother's? What the hell, Sarah? Why didn't you say anything? You just left with the kids without telling me?" "I didn't think I needed your permission," she replied flatly. "I took them to see their grandma." That snapped something in me. "You what? Without even talking to me?" "She's their grandmother," Sarah said, her tone still icy. "They deserve to see her." "Don't you dare act like this is normal," I said, my voice rising. "You took them without telling me, without asking me. You're completely ignoring the fact that this is my family too, Sarah. Are you seriously just trying to piss me off at this point?" "I'm not trying to piss you off," she said, her voice now clipped. "I'm trying to keep my family together. You've made it clear where you stand, and I'm just doing what I think is best for the kids." "You think what's best is taking them to the person who almost burned our house down?" I snapped. "You think what's best is cutting me out of the decision completely? This isn't just about you, Sarah." She sighed heavily, and for a moment, I thought she might actually listen. But then she said, "I don't have time for this right now," and hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone in disbelief. Anger surged through me, but beneath it was a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. She wasn't just ignoring me, she was making it clear that I didn't matter anymore, that she'd chosen her mother over me, over us, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. I clenched my fists, pacing the room. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That evening, Sarah came home, the kids in tow, but things were far from normal. She put them to bed without a word to me, then sat down at the kitchen table with a look on her face I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, but it wasn't regret either. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, sitting across from her. She shook her head, her expression hard. "I don't know what there is to say anymore." "There's plenty to say," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "We need to talk about what this is doing to our family, to us." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can't abandon her. She's my mom, and I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "You've made your choice, Sarah. You're choosing her over us, over the kids, over me. And if that's where we're at, then maybe we need to stop pretending this is working." Her eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. "Are you saying we should separate?" The words caught in my throat, but I forced myself to nod. "I think we need space. Time to figure out what we both want. Because right now we're just hurting each other, and the kids." She didn't respond right away, but the silence spoke volumes. When she finally nodded, her shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the reality of what we'd just agreed to sinking in. I wanted to tell her that I loved her, that I didn't want this to be the end, but I couldn't bring myself to say it, not when I knew she was still so tied to Lisa. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of muffled sobbing. I found Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, her whole body shaking with the force of her cries. "I love you," she said, her voice breaking as she looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "I love you so much, and this is not what I want. But I can't abandon her. My mom has no one. My siblings, they don't care. They're willing to throw her in the streets, and I can't do that. I can't." Her words were like a punch to the gut. I knelt down in front of her, trying to keep my own emotions in check. "I understand, Sarah. I really do. But that doesn't make it my responsibility. It doesn't mean we should sacrifice everything we've built to keep her afloat." She shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her face. "I'm going to stay close," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll still take care of the kids. I'll see them every day. But I can't leave my mom, and I can't make you live with this anymore. I know it's not fair, but I don't know how else to do." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." That evening, we sat the kids down and told them as gently as we could. We didn't use the word separation, but they were smart enough to know something was wrong. Sarah would be staying at her sister's house for a while, and I would stay in the house with them. They cried, and it broke both of us. But we reassured them that we both loved them, and that nothing would change between them and their mom. Watching Sarah pack a bag was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I sat in the living room, staring at the charred carpet and scorched walls, physical remnants of the fire, but also metaphors for what our relationship had become. We loved each other, I didn't doubt that, but love wasn't enough to bridge the growing divide between. When Sarah finally walked out the door, she paused, looking back at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for everything, but I really can't leave my mom." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I know. I wish you could, but I know." She hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but instead she turned and walked away. The house felt emptier than ever after she left, but it also felt calm. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension, no shouting, no lingering dread. It was quiet, and as much as I hated to admit it, I appreciated the peace. I didn't know what the future held for Sarah and me. I didn't know if we'd find our way back to each other, or if this was the beginning of the end. All I knew was that I had to protect my family's peace, even if it meant losing the person I loved most. So Reddit, tell me, what would you do in my situation? Did I take things too far? Or was I right to set this boundary? I love my wife, but I couldn't ignore the danger Lisa brought into our home. I'm trying to protect my family, but it feels like I've lost part of it in the process. How do you even come back from something like this?